Never thought the last words I'd say to the man I once called my soulmate would be whispered in a quiet courtroom, under my breath, with no one else around to hear. You gave me every reason to stop loving you, but I gave myself every reason to start loving my life again. It wasn't rage that drove me to that point. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was silence. Long, heavy silence that had settled into every corner of our home years before the truth came out. Silence that he mistook for forgiveness. Or worse, indifference. His name was Mark. And I guess, to tell it properly, I should say it started with the scent of vanilla. It was subtle, but wrong. One Tuesday evening, around 6:30, just after he walked through the door with his usual tired sigh and loosened tie, I hugged him like I always did. But instead of the mild, familiar musk of his aftershave and the faint trace of stale office air, I smelled something sweet. Too sweet. Something soft and floral, with a hint of vanilla, like a woman's perfume. He kissed my cheek as if nothing was wrong, like I wasn't already piecing together the lie behind his eyes. He'd always been good at pretending. I used to admire that about him, how calm he could stay under pressure, how smooth he was in conversations. But now, standing in our kitchen, with the hum of the refrigerator and the smell of something foreign clinging to him, it felt different. That was the first real crack. Of course, I didn't say anything that night. I made dinner like usual. Rosemary chicken and mashed potatoes, his favorite. And we talked about the dog, the neighbor's broken fence, the usual shallow things couples talk about when the real conversation died years ago. But my heart had already stepped into another room. One I wasn't ready to admit existed. You don't really see the collapse of a marriage when you're living inside it. It happens slowly, like erosion. Small pieces crumbling away until the foundation's too weak to stand. We'd been married for 23 years. I gave him my 20s, most of my 30s, and every part of myself I didn't even know I was sacrificing. I had dreams once. I wanted to open a little coffee shop downtown. I loved to paint back when I had time. I remember telling him that once, curled up on the couch with our legs tangled, a warm summer breeze coming through the window. He kissed my forehead and said, "You'd be great at that. Maybe one day." One day turned into never, because life had bills, and Mark had ambition, and I had the kind of quiet, loyal patience that men like him mistake for permanence. The real evidence came 3 months later, a receipt. It was almost laughably cliché, just like something out of a bad movie. I found it in his coat pocket while doing laundry. A dinner for 2. Expensive. Out of town. I stared at the date on the slip. I remembered it clearly. He told me he was at a conference in Richmond. I'd packed his bag myself. I'd kissed him goodbye at the door, and the whole time he was with someone else. I didn't confront him right away. I needed to be sure. I needed more than just the scent of vanilla and a receipt. I needed the kind of truth that couldn't be denied. So I waited. I watched. I started noticing how he smiled at his phone more often, how he lingered in the shower, how he came home late on Fridays and left early on Mondays, and worst of all, how he stopped looking at me altogether, as if I were furniture. Familiar. Background. That hurt more than any betrayal. The fading, the erasure of intimacy. It was like watching someone slowly walk out of a room, but they keep the door open, just enough for hope to sneak through. Her name was Jessica, 29, a legal assistant at his firm. I found everything one night while he was sleeping. His phone, like always, was tucked beneath his pillow. He'd grown lazy, or maybe just arrogant. I watched him breathe, deep and peaceful, like a man with no conscience, and I unlocked the screen with ease. His passcode hadn't changed in years. My birthday. The messages were all there, hundreds of them. I scrolled through months of emojis, secret hotel names, blurred pictures. I felt something unravel in me. But not in the way you'd think. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't wake him up and throw the phone at him. Instead, I got up, made myself a cup of tea, sat on the back porch, wrapped in an old sweater. I listened to the wind rustling through the trees. The dog barked once at something in the dark, and I just sat. There was a strange peace in that moment, like standing at the edge of a cliff and finally knowing without a doubt that you're going to jump, but also knowing you'll land. I didn't tell him I knew. Not yet. I went to work the next day like usual. I answered emails. I made small talk with Marcy in accounting about her grandson's piano recital. I stopped at the grocery store, bought the good coffee beans, and when I got home I made dinner again. But this time, I smiled differently. Something had shifted. Not in him. In me. I realized that night that revenge wasn't about destruction. It wasn't screaming or throwing plates. It was quiet, deliberate, patient, like rainwater slowly seeping into cracks and freezing overnight. Silent but irreversible. The first thing I did was open a new bank account. I started putting away small amounts, cash back from groceries, bits of my paycheck. I sold a few old things online. Jewelry he never noticed. My old art supplies. Vintage dishes from the attic. I found power in those tiny acts, like I was rebuilding myself with each small deposit. Then I started talking to a lawyer. Quietly, discreetly. A woman named Carla, who listened without judgment. She looked at the printed messages I brought her and simply said, "You have more than enough." We planned. Weeks turned into months. I began sleeping better. Funny thing is, he didn't even notice. Not really. He thought the peace in our home was due to things getting better. He started coming home earlier, hugging me more. Once he brought me flowers, sunflowers, my favorite. I looked at them and wondered if they were guilt or strategy. Either way, they died in the vase 2 days later, just like everything else. When I finally told him, it was on a Sunday morning. The sky was pale with the soft light of winter, and the house smelled like cinnamon and coffee. He was reading the paper. I placed the folder in front of him on the table. Photos, messages, copies of the receipt. He looked at them, and for a moment, he didn't breathe. Then he looked at me. "I can explain," he began. I shook my head. "No, you can't. And you won't." There was no yelling, just silence. And in that silence, something inside him seemed to break. But mine had already broken long ago. He sat there for a long time, staring at the folder like it might rearrange itself into a different story if he looked hard enough. His mouth opened once or twice, but no words came out. And I didn't rush him. I sat across from him, hands wrapped around my coffee mug, the steam rising into the stillness between us. My heart didn't race. My voice hadn't cracked. There were no tears, not this time. Just a calm acceptance that surprised even me. When he finally spoke, his voice was thin, tired. "How long have you known?" I didn't blink. "Long enough." He rubbed his face with both hands, leaned back, and looked at the ceiling like maybe it held the answer to how he had ended up here, exposed and small, in the very kitchen where I had once planned our children's birthday parties. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he muttered. She listened to me. I didn't feel invisible. The words should have stung, but all I felt was cold clarity. "Invisible," I repeated quietly. "I packed your lunches. I handled the taxes. I listened to your office stories even when I was exhausted. I waited up for you when you came home late. I made our life run so smoothly you didn't even have to think about it. I made it easy for you to forget I was there." "That's not the same as being invisible, Mark." He didn't argue, because he knew I was right. The divorce took 6 months. It could have taken less, but he fought the settlement. He wanted to protect his assets, what he thought he'd earned with his long hours and sacrifices. But I had everything. Every message, every receipt, every late-night hotel check-in. My lawyer was a quiet storm, and Mark realized quickly that dragging it out would only cost him more. In the end, I got the house. That surprised him the most. This place was mine before we got married, he reminded me during one of our meetings. But Carla smiled gently and said, "It was her home for 23 years. She's not the one who left." He signed the papers with shaking hands. I stayed in the house, but I changed everything. I painted the walls, replaced the couch, tore up the old carpet. I kept only what I loved. The rest went into donation boxes or to the curb. It felt symbolic, like exhaling years of resentment and letting new air in. There was one evening, a few weeks after the final hearing, when I sat in the living room surrounded by half-empty boxes and a half-full glass of wine. The dog, old, blind in one eye now, lay next to my feet, snoring gently. I stared at the empty wall where our wedding photo used to hang. I didn't feel grief. I didn't feel anger. I felt space. And space, I realized, is where something new can grow. People started asking me if I was going to start dating again. The idea felt foreign, like stepping into someone else's shoes. I wasn't ready, and honestly, I didn't care if I ever was. That wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was me back. I took an art class at the community center. My hands were clumsy at first, but the colors, the textures, they brought something back to life. I started going on long walks in the evenings, sometimes alone, sometimes with the neighbor's widow, Jean, who had a dry sense of humor and a fierce way of surviving loss. I opened that coffee shop, not downtown, but on the edge of the neighborhood near the park. Just a small space with warm lighting and mismatched chairs. I called it Quiet Ground. It started slow, but word spread. People came for the coffee, stayed for the peace. Sometimes I'd see couples sit across from each other and not speak. I knew that silence. I recognized the weight behind it. And other times, I saw people hold hands like they never wanted to let go. Both scenes made me feel something, but not jealousy, just perspective. I ran into Mark once, about a year after the divorce, at the grocery store of all places. He looked older, more tired than I remembered, a little lost in the fluorescent lights and canned music. He saw me before I saw him. His eyes lingered on mine, unsure. "Hi," he said finally. I gave a small smile. "Hi." There was a pause. He looked down at his basket. Just a few items. Frozen meals, a bottle of whiskey, a sad-looking loaf of bread. "You look good," he offered. "Thanks." He didn't ask how I was. He didn't have to. It was all over my face, my posture, the soft wrinkle of contentment around my eyes. "I heard about the coffee shop," he said. That's really great." "It is," I nodded. "I'm happy." He looked at me then. Really looked at me. And I could tell he finally understood what he'd lost. Not just the woman he cheated on, but the woman who had stood beside him for over 2 decades. The one who gave, and then quietly rebuilt herself from the ashes. There was nothing left to say. I nodded once more and walked past him. He didn't follow. People think revenge means ruining someone, making them hurt as much as they hurt you. But for me, revenge was walking into my kitchen each morning, barefoot on new hardwood floors, pouring a cup of the coffee I roasted myself, listening to the birds outside the window, and feeling no ache. It was freedom without fanfare. It was building a life so full and quiet and mine that he had no space in it anymore. And that, in the end, was more satisfying than any scream could have ever been. Some evenings, when the cafe had closed and the last of the soft jazz faded into the warm silence, I'd sit by the front window with a cup of herbal tea and watch the streetlights blink on one by one. The scent of baked cinnamon and roasted beans still lingered in the air. It always reminded me of autumn, even in spring. That space became my sanctuary. People started recognizing me, not as Mark's wife, but as the quiet woman behind quiet ground, the one who remembered your order, who always had a kind smile, who played old soul music on Sundays and hosted small art nights every second Thursday. I didn't talk much about my past, not because I was ashamed, but because it no longer defined me. But some stories don't stay buried, not forever. One late afternoon I was wiping down tables when a woman hesitated just outside the door. She looked young, no older than 30, and held a folder under her arm like it was a shield. Her hair was pulled back tight, makeup too careful. There was something fragile in the way she stood, like a person trying to brace themselves for impact. I knew who she was before she opened the door. Jessica. She stepped inside slowly, like she wasn't sure she'd be welcome. Her eyes scanned the cafe, then found me. Her expression softened, almost apologetic. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she said. I didn't answer, not right away. I just looked at her. "I'm sorry," she added quickly. "I know I'm probably the last person you ever wanted to see, but I needed to say something." I gestured toward the table by the window. "Go ahead." She sat and I joined her. There was a stillness between us, the kind that only women who've shared the same man can understand. Not anger, not sisterhood, something else, something quieter. "I left him," she said after a moment. I looked down at my hands. "When?" "6 months ago. He wasn't who I thought he was." A bitter smile tugged at my lips. "No, he rarely was." "I thought I was different," she whispered. "I thought what we had was real." I met her eyes. "We all do." She blinked fast, like she was trying not to cry. "I didn't come here to make excuses. I know what I did. I just wanted you to know. I'm not proud of it. I thought I was in love, but it was just attention. And loneliness." I nodded slowly. "That's how it starts. A little kindness. A little validation. It feels like a light in the dark." She exhaled, relieved I wasn't throwing her out. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm sorry. Not just for what I did, but for what you went through." I didn't offer her forgiveness, not because I didn't believe her, but because forgiveness to me wasn't something owed or earned. It was something that either came naturally or didn't. "You've got time to make better choices," I said quietly. "Use it." She gave a tearful smile, stood up, and left without looking back. And I felt nothing. Not hate, not pity, just peace. A year later, Quiet Ground won a small business award. Nothing flashy, just a local honor from the Chamber of Commerce. They gave me a plaque and a bouquet of daisies. Jean insisted on throwing a little celebration, so we strung fairy lights across the windows, brought out homemade pies, and turned the speakers up a little louder than usual. I stood behind the counter, watching people laugh and clink glasses. Old friends, new regulars, strangers who had become family. For a long time, I'd believed that rebuilding meant starting over, but I realized now it meant starting with myself. One rainy afternoon, I found an old photo album tucked away in the hall closet. The edges were frayed, the pages stiff. I sat down at the kitchen table and flipped through it. Wedding photos, beach vacations, Mark holding the dog as a puppy, Christmas mornings with wrapping paper everywhere. It didn't hurt. It didn't even make me sad. It just felt distant, like looking into a life that belonged to someone else. I closed the album, tied the string around it again, and placed it back where it belonged. In the past. Sometimes I still catch myself staring at the empty side of the bed, not because I miss him, but because I spent so many years curling myself into a smaller shape, trying to leave room for someone who was never really there. Now, I stretch out. Diagonal, pillows scattered, blanket half off the bed, and I sleep like a woman who has finally come home to herself. People come and go from the cafe. Some bring stories, some leave them behind. I listen, I smile, I serve, and every now and then someone will ask if I'm married, if I live alone. I always say the same thing. I'm not alone. I'm just not with the wrong person anymore. And that's not sadness in my voice. It's freedom. One quiet evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of peppermint tea. The air was thick with the smell of earth after rain. A breeze stirred the wind chimes. The dog lay beside me, breathing slowly in his sleep. The sky turned from gold to soft purple, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt completely okay with where I was. Not because life had gone the way I planned, but because I had finally, truly, become the woman I had once put on hold. And maybe, just maybe, that was the best revenge of all. ChatGPT scazel. Spring came late that year. It tiptoed in slowly, almost shyly, with delicate buds on the dogwood tree in my front yard and long, golden afternoons that stretched lazily into early evenings. The cafe stayed busier longer now, people lingering by the window seats, watching the world thaw. I was sweeping up one evening when I noticed a man standing outside, peering through the glass. He wasn't a regular, mid-50s maybe, wore a denim jacket, and held a small leather-bound notebook under one arm. He didn't come in, just stood there, head slightly tilted, like he was reading the name above the door. Quiet ground. Then he walked away. Didn't think much of it at the time. We got curious passers-by all the time. Artists, students, older folks looking for a quiet place to read. But he came back a week later. This time, he came in, ordered black coffee. No sugar, no milk. Sat in the corner and scribbled in his notebook for nearly an hour. Didn't speak to anyone. I left him be. But I noticed his eyes were observant, constantly moving. Not nervously, but like someone who paid attention to small things. The way the light fell across the table. The way the barista laughed when someone told her a joke. He watched like a man who had once missed something important and was determined not to do it again. He came back the next day, and the next. Always the same seat, always the same black coffee. After a week or so, I finally asked, as I cleared his mug, "You a writer?" He smiled, but it was more in his eyes than on his lips. Trying to be. He looked at the cafe around him. This place, it has a quiet kind of soul. That stayed with me. His name was Nathan. He used to teach literature at a college upstate, but took early retirement after his wife died of cancer 3 years prior. Said the house got too quiet, so he packed up and moved down here, rented a little place near the lake, and tried writing again. We didn't talk much that first month, just a few polite exchanges, but slowly something changed. One afternoon a storm rolled in fast. Rain pounded against the windows like it had a score to settle. The power flickered once, then held steady. A few customers left early, hurrying out under umbrellas. Nathan didn't budge. I brought him a second cup on the house. He looked at me surprised. "You always take care of your strays?" he asked with a soft smile. I shrugged. "Only the quiet ones." That was the beginning. We didn't flirt. Not really. It wasn't like that. It was deeper and slower than that. Like water wearing down stone. We talked about music, about books, about our dogs. His was named Cricket, a border collie with arthritis. We didn't talk about our pasts, not at first, but there was something in the way we listened to each other. Without rush, without expectation. One night, after closing, I stayed behind to finish inventory. He tapped gently on the glass and held up 2 brown bags from the Thai place across the street. I let him in. We ate at the counter. The cafe lights dimmed low. The hum of the refrigerator the only sound between us for a while. My wife loved curry, he said quietly. The spicier the better. She'd eat it with tears streaming down her face. I smiled gently. I used to make chili so hot. Mark had to drink milk between bites. I think he kept eating it just to impress me. Nathan looked at me then. Do you miss him? It was a brave question. I thought about it. I miss the idea of him, I said finally. The person I thought I married. The version of us I believed in. He nodded. Yeah, I get that. And we sat there in the warmth of the cafe, 2 people gently holding the broken edges of old lives, not trying to fix each other, just acknowledging that the pieces mattered. We didn't fall in love, not in the way people expect. No grand declarations, no fireworks. But one evening, as we walked our dogs around the lake, he reached for my hand. Just lightly. No words, no pressure. And I let him. And it felt okay. Not earth-shattering, not a betrayal of my independence. Just a quiet acceptance that maybe healing doesn't always mean being alone. Some nights I still woke up reaching across the bed before I remembered. But now, sometimes, there was another hand there. Calloused. Warm. Not trying to hold me down, just hold me steady. Other nights I slept alone, still diagonal, still wild in my own bed. And that was fine too. That was the beauty of it. There were no rules now, just choices. The first anniversary of the divorce came and went without ceremony. I didn't even remember until I saw the date circled in my old planner, tucked in the back of a drawer. Funny how something once so monumental could fade like that. Instead of mourning it, I spent that day at the cafe, planting lavender in the window boxes. The scent reminded me of my grandmother's garden. I could almost hear her voice as I worked. Soft, practical, always humming under her breath. Everything you water will grow, darling. Make sure it's the right things. She'd say that when I was 6, trying to save a wilting weed in the backyard. Now I knew what she meant. Mark never reached out again. Last I heard, he moved out of state. Something about a consulting job. It didn't matter. He was a ghost in my story now. Not a villain. Not even a memory worth reliving. Just someone I once knew. As for me, I kept growing. Quiet Ground expanded into the space next door. A little bookstore, curated with care. People called it cozy. Said it felt like a warm hug on a cold day. That was all I ever wanted it to be. A place for people to breathe again. Including myself. Because in the end, revenge wasn't about making someone pay. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I had given away without realizing it. It was about standing still in my own life and saying, "This is mine." And if someone chose to stand beside me, not behind me, not above me, but beside me, that was just the bonus. Summer rolled in heavy that year. Thick air, long twilights, the buzz of cicadas starting before noon. The kind of heat that made everything slow down. Conversations, footsteps, even time. Business at the cafe picked up with the warmer weather. Tourists from out of town wandered in, grateful for the cool air and the iced lavender lemonades I started offering. Kids came in with sunburned noses and pocket money, pointing at cookies through the glass. Older couples lingered in the bookstore next door, reading poetry aloud in whispers. It felt like life was humming along gently. No sharp edges, no big upheavals. And yet, even peace has its weight. One night, Nathan and I were closing up together. He was behind the counter drying mugs, sleeves rolled to his elbows. I was counting out the register, my fingers moving automatically over the bills. We hadn't said much that day. just soft glances and small, shared smiles. It was comfortable. Too comfortable. And that scared me. He noticed. He always did. "Something on your mind?" he asked, not looking up. I hesitated, then said, "Do you ever feel like, when things are good, something bad is waiting just around the corner?" He set down the mug. "All the time." I laughed quietly, almost ashamed of the confession. "I know it's silly, but sometimes I look at all this, how settled it feels, and I get this knot in my stomach, like it's all borrowed." He came over, leaned against the edge of the counter beside me. His voice was soft. "It's not borrowed, Anna. You built it." I stared at the register, blinking away sudden tears. "Yeah, but part of me is still waiting for someone to take it away." Nathan didn't offer empty reassurances. He just reached over and gently placed his hand over mine. "I know that feeling. You hold your breath for so long, even safety feels suspicious." Setoa, that was exactly it. A few days later, my sister called. Aaron and I weren't especially close growing up. 5 years between us, different temperaments. She was always the rebel, fast-talking, boundary-pushing, the kind of girl who sneaked out windows and kissed boys behind the bleachers. But we found our rhythm as adults. Distance helped. So did time. "Mom's asking about you," she said. "Says she hasn't heard your voice in months." I bit back the guilt. "I've been busy. You know how it is." Aaron chuckled. "I do. But come on, Anna. You run a cafe, not a country." I smiled despite myself. Then she hesitated. "There's something else. Mark's back in town." I felt a coldness settle low in my stomach. "For what?" "No idea. But I saw him at the hardware store. He looked older. Tired." I sat down at the kitchen table, one hand pressed against my chest. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Just caught me off guard." "Listen," Aaron said, voice softening. "You don't owe him anything. Not a conversation, not a look, not even a thought." "I know." But that night, I couldn't sleep. The next morning I went into the cafe early, opened the windows, let in the cool dawn air. I moved slowly, wiping down the counters, straightening the napkins. The place smelled like fresh scones and citrus cleaner. I brewed a pot of coffee. Black, the way I used to make it for Mark. Bitter. No sugar. And then I poured it down the sink. A week passed. Then another. I didn't see him. Until I did. He came in on a Tuesday, wearing the same cologne, though fainter now. His hair had thinned. His eyes looked sunken, the way a man's eyes look when he's run too far from himself, and finally got tired. He didn't recognize me at first. He looked around the cafe, hands in his pockets, then froze when he saw me behind the counter. He opened his mouth, closed it. Then finally, "Anna." I didn't speak, just looked at him, not with anger, just a quiet, measured stillness. He cleared his throat. "You look good. Different." "I am different." He nodded slowly. "This is your place?" I didn't answer. The answer was obvious. He looked around again. "It's nice. Warm." I didn't offer him a seat. Or coffee. I didn't invite him to stay. "Why are you here, Mark?" His shoulders dropped slightly, as if some practiced performance had deflated. "I don't know," he admitted. "Guess I was curious. Regretful." I waited. "I think about you," he added. "A lot. What I did. How it ended." My jaw tightened. Not from pain. From restraint. "You think saying that gives you something?" He blinked. "No. I just—" He stopped. "I don't know what I expected." "You expected a woman who still needed closure," I said. "But I don't. I already lived through it. I don't owe you my pain." His face twisted, like he wasn't sure whether to look ashamed or defensive. "I'm sorry, Anna." I nodded slowly. I believe you, but that doesn't change anything." He lingered a moment longer, then finally turned and walked out. No drama, no last words, just a man finally facing the silence he earned. That night, I sat outside with Nathan. We watched fireflies dance in the yard, their light flickering like tiny stars. "I saw him," I said. Nathan didn't ask who. He didn't need to. I rested my head on his shoulder. It didn't hurt. It didn't even feel big. It just was. He kissed the top of my head. "That's how you know you've healed." I let that settle. Because it was true. I hadn't built my life to prove anything to Mark, or even to forget him. I had built it because somewhere deep down I had finally remembered myself. And that version of me. She didn't look back anymore. The end of that summer brought a stillness I hadn't felt in years. Not an empty stillness like the aftermath of something breaking, but a full, peaceful kind. Like sitting in a warm bath after a long day, or hearing your mother's voice in your memory when you're not even thinking of her. Mark was gone again. I never saw him after that day. No letter, no second visit, no apology emails. It was as if he had only returned to get a final look at the damage and realized it wasn't his story anymore. And that, I think, was its own kind of justice. It's strange how we wait for our pain to be acknowledged by the one who caused it, only to discover that healing never depended on that. I didn't tell anyone at the cafe what happened, not even Nathan. I told him I saw someone from my old life, and that I was okay. And he, in the patient way that had become his signature, just squeezed my hand and said, "Good." But the thing about peace is, it makes room, and soon, new things started to grow in that space. It was a Thursday when I found the envelope, plain white, tucked between the bills and flyers in the mailbox. No return address, just my name, written in a narrow, looping script. I opened it at the kitchen table, the kettle whistling faintly in the background. Inside was a letter, short, polite. It was from Abigail. "Not here to cause trouble," it began. "But I wanted you to know I'm sorry. For everything." My stomach tightened. He lied to both of us. I believed things that weren't true. I thought he had left you for me, and I told myself that meant something. I was wrong. It didn't last. It never could. But I know the hurt I helped create, and I carry it with me. There was no pleading, no attempts at connection, just a flat truth written in simple words. At the bottom, she signed her name, then. "I hope you're doing well. I really do." I folded the letter once, then again, set it aside. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel forgiving either. I just felt done. That weekend I took a drive, not far, just up to the hills, where the road winds through the pines and the air is cooler. Nathan came with me, a thermos of coffee between us, music low on the speakers. We didn't talk much, just watched the trees move past in a blur of green and gold. We stopped at a lookout spot. The valley stretched out below us like something painted, clouds drifting slow, a hawk circling high above. "I used to come here when I was younger," I told him, "before I got married, before I was trying to be anyone else. I'd sit out here and write little poems, or cry for no reason. I thought it was dramatic. Now I think I was just trying to feel everything fully, while I still had time." He smiled. "Did you stop writing?" "For a long time." "Why?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Because I stopped believing my voice mattered." The breeze stirred the trees below. A long breath of silence passed between us. "You should start again," he said. I didn't. Not right away. But the idea stuck. And a few weeks later, I opened a drawer in my bedroom and pulled out an old notebook. The leather was cracked. The pages curled slightly with time. My handwriting on the first page was neat, hopeful, younger. I turned to a fresh page, and I began. Nothing grand, just a paragraph about the smell of coffee at dawn, a memory of my dad lighting the stove at the cabin when we were kids. The way the pine wood smoke always made me think of cinnamon, even though we never had cinnamon. One entry became 2, then 10, then 30. I started keeping the notebook behind the counter at the cafe. On slow days, I'd write between customers. On busy days, I'd scribble thoughts on napkins and tuck them inside the pages. It didn't matter if it was good. It mattered that it was mine. Nathan noticed. He always noticed. One night we were locking up, and he tapped the notebook sitting beside the register. Will I ever get to read that? I hesitated. Maybe, I said. Someday. He nodded, respectful, but I saw the smile in his eyes. Fall came with that particular kind of light, softer, more golden, like the world was lit from within. The cafe changed too. Pumpkin loaves, cinnamon steam, scarves hanging on the back of chairs. People started talking more softly, as if in tune with the season. One afternoon I saw a young woman crying in the back booth. Quietly, not dramatically, just small tears slipping down her cheek as she stared into her tea. I brought her a cookie. No charge. Just placed it gently on her napkin and gave her a smile. She looked up surprised, a little embarrassed. I said, "Sometimes we need a little sweetness to remind us it's okay to keep going." She nodded, eyes red. "Thank you." After she left, I thought about how many women had sat where she sat. How many I never noticed when I was still living inside my own storm. How many had noticed me. Maybe that's what the cafe had become. A shelter, not just from the rain or the cold, but from all the quiet ache we carry around. Nathan and I never moved in together. People expected us to, but we both knew better. He had his house. I had mine. We slept over often, but kept our separate spaces, our separate rhythms. It made things cleaner, less tangled, and we loved each other without needing to be each other's everything. That, I think, was the most healing part of all. By winter, my notebook was full. I bought a second one, this time blue. I labeled it with a little sticker, Volume 2. Nathan gave me a fountain pen for Christmas. "Because your words deserve to feel elegant," he said. It was the kindest gift I'd received in years. We spent Christmas Eve with his sister's family. Christmas morning at my house. Coffee and cranberry scones, jazz on the radio, the fireplace crackling. And I realized, somewhere between the second cup and the third laugh, that I no longer felt like I was waiting for something to go wrong. I was just living. There's no big ending here, no perfect bow. Just a woman sitting in the back of her own cafe, watching snow drift against the windows, writing stories that once lived only in pain and now live in peace. Just a woman who rebuilt her life from the inside out, who learned that revenge isn't always loud, and closure doesn't come from anyone else's mouth. Sometimes it looks like warm light on a quiet morning. Sometimes it smells like cinnamon and coffee. Sometimes it feels like your own name written in your own hand, across the cover of a new beginning. The new year arrived under soft skies and quiet resolutions. No big parties. No loud declarations, just the sound of wind brushing against the windows and the slow turning of pages in the blue notebook, where I now wrote daily, even if only a sentence or two. I never made a resolution list that year. Instead, I wrote down one line: live with the same tenderness I once begged the world to give me. And that was enough. February brought a surprise. It came in the form of an email, tucked among spam, newsletter updates, and an invoice from a coffee distributor. The subject line was simple: a proposal for Anna's. I clicked, expecting another pitch to install digital menus or sign up for a delivery app, but it was a message from a local writer, someone who'd been quietly visiting the cafe for months, though I hadn't known her name. She introduced herself as Mel. She wrote, "I've been sitting in your cafe for nearly a year now, watching, listening, healing. Your space has a pulse, Anna. It's a refuge, a whisper in a loud world. I'm putting together a collection of essays on women-led spaces and the quiet power they hold. I would love to feature your cafe, and if you're open to it, your story." I read the email twice, then again, and for a moment, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the old fear that being seen might invite judgment. Or worse, pity. But I'd come too far to retreat now, so I wrote back. "Thank you, Mel. I'd be honored. Let me know how I can help." We met the next week. I recognized her immediately. Short hair tucked under a wool cap, fingers stained slightly with ink. She smiled as if we already knew each other. And in a way, I suppose we did. She asked thoughtful questions about the cafe, the people, the evolution, and then gently about me. Not the headline version, not "Divorced Woman Reclaims Life," but the quieter truths. "What did you mourn the most?" she asked at one point, voice low. I thought about that. "The version of me that believed love meant disappearing," I said. She nodded, writing it down. "No." The essay was published in a small but beautiful print magazine that spring. Nathan framed a copy and hung it in the hallway, across from the staff room. Customers began asking about it, and for the first time, I didn't mind telling the story. Not all of it, not the private wounds, but the essence. The journey back to myself, the way pain broke me open, and the strange beauty of what bloomed in its place. Women stayed after hours to talk. Men too, sometimes. People told me their own quiet heartbreaks, their redemptions, their unfinished chapters. The cafe had become a confessional, a sanctuary, a little lighthouse. And I was no longer the one in the storm. One day in early May, I got a letter in the mail with handwriting I hadn't seen in decades. Neat, controlled, with the tiniest curl at the ends of certain letters. It was from my father's sister, Aunt Carol. I hadn't heard from her since his funeral, almost 20 years ago. She wrote, "I heard about your cafe through the article. I just wanted to say, your father would be so proud. He always said you were the one with a quiet strength, said you'd change the world in small ways. I cried reading that. I hadn't realized how deeply I'd missed being someone's daughter." Nathan's mother passed away in June. It was a soft goodbye, a long illness, a tired body, a peaceful breath. I held his hand through the funeral, made sandwiches for the reception, folded laundry while he sat quietly on the porch staring at the horizon. Grief was different when it wasn't mine, but it still brushed against me, still made me ache in the spaces where I had once felt lost, too. He didn't talk much those weeks, but he would reach for me at night, in the dark, with a kind of quiet desperation that said more than words ever could. And I let him, because that, too, is love. Not just the laughter, not just the comfort, but the willingness to hold each other in silence when the world feels too heavy to carry alone. By August, a publisher had reached out. Mel had passed my name along. They were looking for voices for a collection of personal essays. Small stories about rebuilding, reframing, reclaiming. And mine, they said, felt like a seed that could grow. I laughed when I read the email, and then I cried, because I had once believed that nothing about me mattered, that my voice was too soft, my experiences too ordinary. And now, here I was, being asked to share them. I said yes. The book took shape slowly. I wrote in the mornings, before the cafe opened, when the air was still fresh, and the world hadn't yet pressed its weight onto the day. I filled pages with memories, of burnt toast and silent dinners, of laughter in the kitchen with Nathan, of the sound of a man walking away without slamming the door. The days after the book was published brought a strange quiet. Not a physical silence. The cafe was as alive as ever, but a deeper stillness inside me, like the final exhale after holding your breath for years. It didn't become a bestseller. It wasn't meant to, but it landed where it needed to, in the hands of women sitting in waiting rooms, on nightstands beside half-sipped mugs of tea, in the bottom of tote bags with tissues and receipts. And I started getting letters. Not many, maybe one a week, but they were all the same shape. Quiet voices thanking me for telling the story they'd never been able to speak out loud. One woman wrote, "I thought I was the only one who stayed too long. Thank you for reminding me I'm not stupid, just human." Another, "You made me cry in my car at lunchtime. I think I needed that more than anything." And a third, "I showed your book to my daughter. She's 26. She asked me if I'd ever felt like that. And I told her the truth for the first time in years." Those letters, they did something to me, because for so long I had felt like I was writing into a void, that my pain was too ordinary, too shameful, too small. But pain connects, quietly, relentlessly, truthfully, and I began to understand that telling the truth, even the small, unglamorous parts, was its own kind of activism, its own kind of legacy. That fall, something unexpected happened. Nathan asked me to go with him to Italy. Not forever. Just a month. A writing retreat of sorts, hosted by one of his university friends who'd bought a crumbling farmhouse in the Tuscan hills and turned it into an artist's haven. "It's time you wrote without distractions," he said. I blinked. "The cafe?" "Handled. Margot's more than capable. I've already asked her." I stared at him. "You planned this." He grinned. "Guilty." I hadn't been out of the country since I was 28. Back when Mark and I had done that rushed honeymoon to Barcelona, where we argued 3 times before we even got to the hotel. This was different. This was for me. And I said yes. Italy smelled like rosemary and old stone. The air was thick with history. Like every breeze carried a whisper from someone who lived 1,000 lives before you. The farmhouse was imperfect. Creaky stairs, wasps in the windows, furniture that didn't match. But it felt more like home than any hotel ever had. Mornings were slow. Coffee in hand, feet bare, notebook open on a sun-drenched terrace. Evenings were communal. Strangers sharing bread and wine, stories spilling across candlelit tables in 4 different languages. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I remembered how much of myself I'd put on pause. I wrote pages, dozens of them. Not just essays, but beginnings of something bigger. Maybe fiction, maybe memoir, maybe a hybrid. Didn't matter. I was writing from a place of fullness now. Not rage, not desperation, but clarity. There was one night, 2 weeks into the trip, when I sat alone outside the villa. A full moon hung over the olive trees, casting soft shadows on the stone path. I was wrapped in a shawl, listening to the cicadas, sipping a glass of wine someone had gifted us. Nathan was inside, talking with the other guests. I could hear his laugh floating out the window. And I thought, this is it. This is what healing looks like. Not fireworks. Not justice in the eyes of the world. Just a moment like this. Whole, undemanding, quietly joyful. And I closed my eyes and let myself cry. Not out of sadness, not regret, but something softer. Something like release. When we returned home, I was changed in small, unnameable ways. I didn't reopen old wounds. I didn't reach for the past. I just kept living forward. The cafe felt warmer somehow. Or maybe I did. I started offering small writing workshops in the back room on Sunday afternoons. Nothing fancy. Just women gathering with tea and notebooks, talking about stories, memory, forgiveness. We called it the Quiet Table. It grew, slowly, but steadily. And it reminded me that stories aren't just for books. They're for passing hand to hand, like folded letters, or recipes, or heirloom rings. One afternoon, Erin came to visit. It had been years since we last spoke face to face, outside of a few scattered holiday messages. She stood in the doorway of the cafe, unsure, until I called her in with a smile. We sat in a booth. I made her favorite, chai and lemon cake. She was different now, a little grayer, softer in the shoulders, but still had that fierce glint in her eye. "I've read your book," she said. Twice. I laughed. Even the parts about you. Especially the parts about me. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she added, "You saved my life too, you know." I looked at her. I was going to marry someone just like Mark. I could feel it. But then I saw what happened to you, and I got out. My chest tightened. "I never knew," I said. "Well, you weren't supposed to." She grinned. "But I figured you should know now." We hugged when she left. Not out of duty. Out of love. Real, hard-earned love that grew from the rubble. Years passed. Not rushed. Not wasted. Just full. There were holidays, birthdays, new wrinkles, new notebooks. Nathan and I traveled when we could, rested when we couldn't, and found laughter even in the hard seasons. Like when my mother passed, and we sat on the porch drinking her favorite wine, retelling her most ridiculous stories. I never remarried. People asked, but I always smiled and said, "That part of my life is already full." Because it was. Not with legal papers or rings, but with presence, companionship, a man who held my hand not to possess me, but to remind me I was never alone. Now, years later, I sit here. At the same kitchen table where I once read Abigail's letter, and I write this last entry. My hands are older now, but they're steady, and I look around this quiet house, with its worn books, its soft lamps, its window seat full of old drafts and wild dreams. And I think about the woman I used to be, the one who was cheated on, who was left, who was broken. And I want to tell her this. You won't always feel like rubble. You'll rebuild. You'll become the house you always searched for in someone else, and you'll fill it with laughter and pages and people who show up on time. You'll learn that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's wisdom, and that the best revenge is no longer needing any. Just peace, just love, just this life. Lived on your own terms, in your own voice. I wrote about the letter Abigail sent, about Erin's voice on the phone when she warned me, about the moment I stood in court and realized I was no longer afraid. It wasn't a revenge story. It wasn't even a comeback story. It was just a woman's life, pieced together from the cracks, told honestly. I never told Mark about the book. Maybe he saw it. Maybe he didn't. It didn't matter. The story wasn't his to finish anymore. One year, to the day, after that final conversation with him, I stood in the cafe after closing and turned off the lights. The room went dark, then glowed softly in the streetlight outside. The tables were empty. The silence was gentle, and I whispered, "Thank you." Not to him, to me, for staying, for choosing, for rising. And then I locked the door, walked out into the cool night, and went home, where Nathan was waiting, and my notebooks were stacked neatly on the desk, and my life was still unfolding like a quiet, steady song. No fireworks, just peace, And that, I've learned, is the most powerful revenge of all. Living, freely, fully, and without looking back. The seasons turned again. And with them came a kind of stillness. Not stagnation, but rhythm. The kind of rhythm you don't notice at first, like the heartbeat of an old house. I began to live in smaller ways, but deeper ones. Morning walks without my phone. Slow grocery trips, where I actually spoke to the woman behind the cheese counter. Planting herbs in my windowsill, not because I needed them, but because I liked the smell. There was no big transformation left to chase, no fire to crawl out of, just a life, my life, and I liked it that way, but it didn't mean it was over. In my 60s now, I find myself thinking more about legacy, not in the grand sense, like books or businesses, but in the tiny ways we stay behind. The look someone gives their daughter because we once said it saved us. The way someone wipes down a counter because they saw us do it with care. The courage a woman finds to leave a loveless home because she saw a stranger in a cafe, reading my book and asking questions she never dared to ask. Those are the fingerprints I want to leave. Not the kind the world applauds. The kind only a few people carry in their memory, like a small, warm stone in the pocket of their lives. Last year, something strange happened. A young woman showed up at the cafe just before closing, trembling as she stood at the counter. I thought she might be sick, or in trouble. She handed me a dog-eared copy of my book, covered in sticky notes. "Are you her?" she asked. I smiled. "I am." She looked down, eyes glassy. "I read this in a shelter. I left my fiancé after I read chapter 9. The part where you said, 'Pain is persuasive, but it doesn't mean it's right.'" I didn't know what to say, so I walked around the counter and hugged her. We stood there, two strangers linked by wounds and pages. And when she left, she wrote her number on a napkin and said, "If you ever teach again, I want to learn." I kept that napkin. It's folded into the back of my notebook, the one I keep for names, moments, second chances. And then there's Nathan, still here, still that quiet, unwavering force beside me. We never made it official, not legally. We talked about it once, sitting in the car outside the courthouse where people were filing in for their marriages and divorces. We watched them for almost an hour. And then he said, "You know I'm yours, right? Paper or no paper." I nodded, and that was that. Some things don't need ceremony. They just need consistency. We travel now and then. Slow places, small towns. We take the train when we can, because he says he likes the way it feels to arrive without speed. I read. He sketches. Sometimes we sit in silence for hours, just looking out the window like it's the first time we've seen a river or a fence line. And sometimes I think, this is what Mark never understood. That love isn't the grand gestures. It's the quiet presence at the end of the hallway, when you're crying and don't want to explain. It's the man who hands you tea and doesn't ask why you're not talking. It's the one who chooses you when you're not glowing, when you're grieving, when you're just you. A few months ago, I had a health scare. Nothing major, thankfully. A false alarm after a shadow on a scan. But for 3 days, I was back in that familiar place. The waiting rooms, the stale air, the polite laughter of women trying not to imagine dying before finishing their favorite chapter. I saw a woman there who reminded me of myself 20 years ago. She had that frozen look, like she'd been bracing for months, and just now realized she couldn't outrun the storm. We made eye contact, just once, and I smiled. I hope it reached her. Because if I've learned anything in these years, through the betrayal, the leaving, the rebuilding, it's this. Most of the time what saves us isn't answers. It's recognition. A look that says, I've been there. A voice that says, "Me too." Sometimes I wonder if Mark ever found what he was chasing. If the woman he left me for turned out to be the escape he imagined. If he ever sits in the dark and thinks about the house we shared, the garden I planted, the way my hair fell over my shoulders when I didn't know he was watching. But I don't wonder for long, because those questions don't matter anymore. Not really. I don't need closure. I don't need apology. He gave me something else, unintentionally perhaps, but something powerful. The opportunity to become the woman I was meant to be. I wouldn't have chosen that route, but I'm not sure I would undo it either. Some fires clear the forest for things to finally grow. And so here I am, 63, tired knees, laugh lines, a heart that's been broken and repaired more times than I can count. I wake up most mornings with gratitude, not for perfection, but for peace. For a life that doesn't ask me to shrink or edit or smile when I don't feel like smiling. I keep writing, sometimes for others, sometimes just for myself, but always with the belief that stories, real stories, still matter. That somewhere, a woman I'll never meet is holding one of my pages in her lap and whispering, "Maybe I can do this too." And that is enough. That is everything. Some stories don't end with fanfare. They just settle into place, like dust on an old photograph. You don't notice the moment it happens. You just look up one day and realize the pain isn't sitting in your chest anymore. It's moved, softened, made room for something else. That's where I am now. I still work at the cafe, though I've handed most of the day-to-day to Margot. She's better at managing people than I ever was. I've become the backroom presence. The one who refills sugar jars and wipes down the chalkboard menu while humming songs from the 70s. Sometimes people recognize me from the book. They whisper to each other, then walk up and say something kind, nervous. I never get used to it, but I always smile, because I know how hard it is to speak out loud to someone who once made you feel braver. Nathan built me a writing nook upstairs, a tiny sunroom with creaky floors and a chipped desk that overlooks the street. I sit there most mornings, wrapped in an old cardigan, writing small things, sometimes big things. I don't pressure it anymore. I just let it come. Abigail and I talk now. Not often, but enough. She's older, different. I think she carries her own regrets, though she's never said them out loud. Last Christmas she sent me a card. No message. Just a photo of her with her daughter on the beach. On the back she'd written, "She'll know better. I'll make sure of it." I stared at that line for a long time, and something in me finally let go. I wrote back, "Good. That's all any of us can do." I never heard from Mark again. He vanished into the life he chose, or maybe the one that chose him. But I stopped needing that story to end a certain way. He was a chapter, not the whole book. And I'm still here, still writing, still loving my quiet, sturdy, complicated life. There's a quote I keep taped above my desk. It says, "She never needed saving. She only needed permission to become." That's the truth. That's my truth. And maybe, if someone else reads this someday, curled on their couch, wondering if they're strong enough to leave, to stay, to heal, maybe it'll become their truth too. Because life breaks you, then shows you who you are when you get back up. And that is the most beautiful revenge of all.